21st October 2017. When I started writing this, I opened my old rhyme book for some lines, then immediately closed it. As if I didn't recognize the rhymes or who wrote it. As if someone else had rewritten all my younger poems with much less maturity, content, style, cadence, meter, and pretty much everything else it read. It wasn't mine. Mine sounded so much better in my head. But being the idiot I was, I had signed every one of them, as if those masterpieces of crap would someday sell for millions, so I couldn't disown them now. And so they will serve as a testament that people change somehow. And while this is, so far, something great in my head, I can already see my future self looking back, sad and looking down, disowning me, and that hypocrite will succeed because I no longer sign my poems. Good luck deleting this video though. But it took me back to when I used to read, and when the page turned, it stirred something within me that convinced me I was part of the story. Part of the game, guns, guts, and glory. I didn't escape from reality, but reality escaped me. And now I'm away from the story that shaped me. I don't read anymore. They're just words on a page. I used to draw, shaping and shading the sonnets that stayed in their wordless expression, existing absurdly in burlesque pagination. Each stroke for me was the midnight hour. Freedom reigned with djinn-like powers. I could grant any wish I desired, create a new world, awe-inspired, and the world was just a drawing book. I don't draw anymore. I draw breaths. Too slow, no more time to give the time it took. And I used to practice magic to see bewilderment on people's faces. The card, the deck, the coin, the jest, a trick for all the ages. I don't do magic anymore. It's just a way to fool them. And I used to write, and my ink made love to the paper. The shape of each word as it fit with the rest, each letter a brick in the skyscraper. And I cared for my poems deeply, covering the books with cloth to protect them from dust. I don't write anymore. They're just rhyming words, welcome to rhyme and rust. And I used to write love songs and letters and poems and such. And I kept a record of each of my letters for each time I fell in love. That kick in the stomach, the flush in my ears, the flying over the clouds above. And now hindsight tells me it may have been foolish, my infatuation with love. It hadn't meant much. I don't love anymore. I guess I just grew up. Now, as you can guess from that expertly crafted poem, I'm an IT consultant and I work in the space of HR. And I've lived in around 6 countries now, and I've worked with people from over 15 nationalities. And they say great minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, and small minds discuss people. So of course, I'm going to talk about people. And I'm just going to talk about how all my living abroad and talking to people within the country, I've lived in over 4 states. And they're all different. And I've worked with a lot of different sorts of people. And I'm just going to talk about how I rethink them now that I have a lot more poetry at my hand. I believe that each poem is a reflection of self. And in the HR space, I learned that one of the biggest problems we have is the counterbalance and countering of bias. How do I don't look at people in a certain way? How do I make sure that my perspective on people is not against someone and is not unfair? And through this little piece of talk, I want to convey what I think now. Over the years, what I've learned through 2 things. One, my understanding of myself. And the reason I say that is because I believe that the best way to understand other people is to understand yourself. And 2, how the interface between people works. How I've learned things by understanding other people and other groups of people in general. So to talk about the first thing, I'm just going to recite a couple more of those poems, so brace yourselves. 17th November 2008. I just want to sleep and slip away, sleeping in a place away from this, where if you're known to have a heart of gold, they'll steal that too while your body is being sold. 30th December 2010. Scars so deep they still show, still recovering slow from the seed you sow so long ago. I know, brilliant poetry. But as you can hear in these words, there's a certain romanticization of death. There's a certain teenagerish immaturity. And as I go through them, I can see that progression. I hate these poems. That's what the first poem's about. And I have von Willebrand's disease, so VWD. which is a bleeding disorder, which means I've spent some time in cancer hospitals looking at other people with real big problems, and I've seen death firsthand. And I've also seen death in the family, and which is what leads me to 10th December 2012. The poor man passed away, they said. No, you're neither rich nor poor once you're done and dead, just dead. And no truth can be told truer. The gone are just gone, the left grieving. I never mourn the loss, I only mourn the living. For the dead shed no tears. Remember in your darkest days, your next breath is a blessing. When you feel like dying, the next death is a lesson. Uncertain is oblivion, doubtful if tomorrow will be here, or today will be the day of irony when the alive don't smile and the dead shed no tears. So you can see there's some change in not just the meter and the cadence, but also in the overall viewpoint that the poem takes. And I believe this book is a reflection of a lot of different versions of me. And that brings me to the first thing about the individual perception: change. I believe that, I now believe at least after this study of myself, that people change. And the idea of reformation is central to the idea of any justice system that ever existed in the universe. The idea of reformation is so universal that when I, as an IT consultant, go to implement recruitment systems, and I ask people whether you want the system to flag people who answer yes to the question, do you have a criminal record, as disqualified, I'm proud to say that every one of my clients has opted to not do that. Every one of my clients went with the idea that you should mark them, flag them, so that we can ask them questions about what they did, and we can understand whether they've reformed, whether now they're employable people, but never disqualify them directly based on a past mistake or a past act that they did, because they might have reformed. Which means the most important takeaway that I took from these poems and that notion of reformation is that because people change, you must always give the first impression, the second impression, the third impression, as many impressions as it takes, which means we need to reassess. And what I did from that, and what I learned from that, is I reached out to a couple of old friends that I no longer was in touch with, people that I didn't get along with necessarily a few years ago. And I'm glad I did that, because now we're both different people, and we're people who connect much better than we did back in the day. And they're now assets to my own life because I have a new perspective from them. And there's a different synergy that exists between us. And I would have lost all of those great people had I not understood that I need to reassess them. And the second, and an extremely important takeaway that I had from this, is a culture of feedback. Because if it is inevitable that we'll change. And if it is inevitable that we'll change, we need to change in a positive direction. The only way you can change in a positive direction is by soliciting feedback and changing where change is required. And that culture of feedback is by and large, I believe, lacking in the world. I've been to so many meetings across my clients' places, my own organization, where people are often afraid to talk about what the feedback is. They would talk the same things outside at the tea stall very, very openly. They would talk about the problems, they would discuss the bottlenecks, but when you are in the meeting room and when you are supposed to actually say that, you're a bit afraid that somebody is going to be offended, that somebody is going to have repercussions for that. And so you don't give that feedback, which makes it extremely imperative, extremely important that we create that culture where people can come up to you and tell you that you're wrong, like I expect a lot of you to come up to me and tell me where I messed up in this talk. From that, the notion of an individual self, I go to a notion which deals with other people. So I want to talk a little bit about how I feel about groupings. So groupings, I believe, have been traditionally used to create a divide. So there are differences. So you have religion, you have sexual orientation, you have race, you have gender, you have music preference, you have food preference. And these are all different groups. I am a vegetarian, you're a non-vegetarian, I am a different group than you are. And I understood that. That was a very ubiquitous concept. But then I went ahead. So there's something that I would like to share here. I'm selfie averse. I don't like pictures, I don't like selfies. But in terms of mementos, I have receipts. I have receipts to all the taxi rides that I've taken over the years. And each of these taxi rides for me was a story told. And so I'm just going to take you through that journey of the stories that I've heard over the years and what I've learned from them. So the first place that I would like to talk about is the United Arab Emirates. I went to UAE thinking that there is a lot of differences that I'll find there, because I knew that there will be people from neighboring countries as well, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, and we were different because we were in a different group. I was, nationality-wise, I was Indian, and they were different. So yeah, there was a group difference there. So I identified that, and I thought that's the end of it. I'll be different, they'll be different. Then I realized something. I realized that I liked biryani, and they liked biryani. I realized that I spoke something like Hindi and they spoke something like Hindi. And I realized that I am good looking and they look like me. So essentially, I realized that there are more things in common that I have with all of these people than I have in with things that are making me different. And so I feel that I'm no longer that different from them. When I talk about UAE, again, I had clients, I requested them to teach me Arabic. And so my clients what they used to do was they used to write the agenda of the meeting on the board on the left-hand side and one word every day on the right-hand side in Arabic, Hindi and English, so that I would learn a little bit every day. And they used to separate out the vegetarian food for me so that I could eat, identify all the dishes. And so after this, after the UAE chapter was done, I went to England. And the first thing that I looked for was hummus. Because somehow the foreign Arabic food did not seem that foreign anymore. And that felt a lot like home. And again, here I was sure that there was a lot of difference. There was no way that I could relate that well with the English. And again, I started making a chart because that's my entire job. I make charts. So again, we saw that they look different. I look different. But again, I loved Stephen Fry. They loved Stephen Fry. I loved Indian food, they loved Indian food. I did think British food was not that well cooked, and I thought it was a bit flavorless, and guess what? So did they. And then I found that we were more or less the same people. We all enjoyed Doctor Who occasionally, we all enjoyed Harry Potter. And I don't think that there's enough differences there to separate me from them. And then I went to Scotland. And there, I was absolutely certain there's no commonality, except for our common love of beverages. Not those, tea I mean, I promise. So essentially, what I'm trying to say is there's a lot in common than you think. If you find nothing else in common, I have two stories for you. And one question. The question is, have you ever been to a different state where they spoke some other language for a long while and then you hear your own? And that just registers in your head and you really want to go there and talk to them about that? That's the question. Think about it. I can't solicit an answer right now. The two anecdotes I'd like to share with you is, when I was in the UAE, I took a taxi ride, one of those in the receipts. And apparently that was his last ride. He was retiring. The taxi driver was about to retire. And what he told me was, I know you're young, I know you're traveling, but once the dust settles, make sure that you go home. Because there is no sounder sleep, he said, than the one under your own flag. Again, in Scotland, there's this folklore. They believe that no matter where a Scottish person dies in the world, their spirit returns taking the low road back to Scotland. And their spirit, no matter where you die, you come back to your home country. That idea of home is such a universal concept and such a universal connect that I believe that is one common ground if there is nothing else present. And with that, I think the takeaway for me was commonality. I believe that groupings, these cohorts, these labels that we put are more or less fluid. And the idea has to be to identify that common ground. And why I talk about this in the terms of bias is because it's very difficult to have a bias against your own group. And once you realize that everybody is your own group, I don't see any scope for a bias to exist. And the most important takeaway for me from this was to talk. Because each human, ultimately all the books you read are written by people. And I've met a lot of people in those taxi rides, by the way, who wrote books about the place, about a particular topic. And I could have read those books, of course. I'm reading some of them right now. But those people were the horse's mouth. Those people were their own stories. Those people were their own human libraries. And I would have missed out on all of that had I not had the chance to talk to them. So I think my biggest takeaway was to talk to people. So even when in this room you're leaving, I'd say pick somebody, start trying to learn their story. And there was one question I was posed yesterday night. What about the introverts? What about people who don't like talking? And I was thinking about that, and I have one solution I can offer, hopefully, and that is that I used to debate a lot. And they used to give me a topic on which I was supposed to talk for 7.5 minutes, non-stop. I'm pretty good at that, as you can see. And I was supposed to talk on topics sometimes that I didn't agree with. So essentially, they would give me stuff which was against my own opinion, and I was supposed to favor that for 7.5 minutes. And what that taught me is, it's not very difficult to look at the other side. It's not very difficult to walk in somebody else's shoes. Once you do that, you open yourself up to, again, the groups that we were talking about. You put yourself into a different group. And I think introverts can do that too. Reading, talking, debating. I think that is something that is very fundamental to human nature. It's just that along the way somewhere, we forgot about it. And that's what I hope that I'll remember. I just have one last poem that I would like to share with you. It's a relatively new one, 18th March 2018. When I started writing this, I didn't open my old rhyme book because I can't live in the past anymore. So now I write rhymes about writing rhymes, and my nights are spent fighting crime. If it's a crime to look that good, I'm a responsible citizen. This poem could have been viral, but I guess I'm the medicine. So now this stands as a testament that people change somehow. There must be something right with my eyes because everyone looks just like me now. And you and I connect on levels deeper than a video game. And each poem you write in life will bear within it your name. And it's okay to hate them later because that's what we call growth. This has gone on for far too long, so I'll end on this note.